Well, good morning. Let's make some kombucha. So before we start, there's some processes that we're gonna go through, and it may be a little overwhelming, but just bear with me. It's not as complicated as it will seem. I know the first time I ever brewed, I was nervous. I was actually nervous. They might tell me I was nervous, and I was like, I don't wanna ruin this, I don't wanna mess it up. But I just followed a kombucha group on Facebook. I learned a little from a lady that I got my SCOBY starter tea from, Irene. She gave me some good tips, and then I also got this book. You can find it on Amazon or a used bookstore or whatever, the Big Book of Kombucha. This is very helpful. It'll teach you how to start, how to flavor, and so many other things you can use with your SCOBY mats and so forth. So let's go on into the kitchen and get started. You guys, happy brewing. Okay, so I'm doing it a little different today. I'm in the kitchen and I'm gonna show you the products that I use for starting my kombucha. Typically you use, if you want to start out not flavoring it, I use basic green tea or black tea or both. So I'm going to mix mine. I'm going to do 3 bags of green tea and 4 bags of black tea. I do prefer the black tea in my kombucha a little better, but it's optional. You're gonna grab a pot that can hold at least, I would say, 10 cups. So like a half a gallon. And what I do is I take my measuring cup and I fill it with hot water that I already pre-emptied in my pot here. And I'm going to put it into my saucepan or my soup pot. Okay, so I placed 2 cups. So I'm gonna do 2, 4, okay, 1 second, and 6. You're going to add your tea bags to that, and you're going to add 3/4 to 1 cup of good sugar. I use turbinado sugar or organic cane sugar. I know you're all probably thinking, well, you're sugar-free. No, I'm like, well, so when you're making a kombucha or a ferment, those yeast and things in the air eat the sugar. You're really not consuming it once it converts. So you're gonna add your 1 cup of sugar. That'll start dissolving down. And I usually leave the top of the stove off. Okay, so the sugar is definitely breaking down and dissolving. The water's nice and hot. So I'm gonna add my 7 tea bags. Now typically you do 6 to 8 tea bags for about a gallon of kombucha. So I did 6 cups of hot water. I will end up adding about 5 to 6 more. You'll see that in the end of the process. And so what I'll do is I kind of twist them all together so they can start steeping, and I'll give this a good stir. You should always sterilize your utensils first. So like I just boil the hot water, run it through the bowl, run it over my spoon and any other, the measuring cup, anything else that I'm using, just so that there's no contamination. And you can easily grow mold. So yeah, hot water, vinegar is the trick. So that's stirring. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And so I just kind of twist them together so they don't get lost. And I'll just swirl them around a little bit and let that steep off. And I just put my timer on for, I typically do 6 minutes. You can go longer, but keep in mind, the longer you go, especially if you go over 10 minutes, the more bitter your kombucha is gonna be, and sometimes that leaves an unpleasant taste when you're drinking it. So yeah, so we'll let that go for 6 minutes and let everything do what it needs to do. And I'm just gonna show you one other thing. So this is something I grabbed. I think they were really inexpensive, so I grabbed the green tea and the black tea. I got these, I think, at Aldi or something. Not my favorite, but you can use any tea you want. I personally think a black tea or green tea is the best because they leave the most neutral flavor. You can get decaf. Most people say decaf or regular doesn't matter, but being that I've been brewing for 2 years now, and through trial and error of different brands and flavors of tea. I found that this one, which you can find on Amazon, it's called British Breakfast, comes in a black tea and green tea, and you can get it in herbal tea too. For me, make the best kombucha. They are regular, they're not decaf. Again, people say it doesn't matter. I find that it does, but I don't have any left of this, so I had to resort to the cheaper stuff. It still does the trick, I just don't think it does the best. Alrighty folks, so I removed the tea bags, squeezed them slightly, and gave a good stir to my tea. Now bear in mind, I did not keep my stovetop on to continue keeping it hot. I used the hot water from my electric water heater and used that to dissolve the sugar and also brew the tea. This is a faster process. Traditional kombucha brewing, you put it on the stove, you bring the water to a boil, you add your sugar, your tea, and you give it time. And then you let it come down to a room temperature naturally. And I did that in the past when I first started out. It takes too long and I'm impatient. So that's why I do half the amount of hot water first, which was 6 cups. Then after I took the tea bags out, I added 2 more cups, which would make it 8. And now I'm gonna add 2 more, which is 10 with the ice. So we're gonna pour this in. And so it will give me maybe slightly a little bit more than 10 cups of water, give or take, but that's okay. I mean, a little bit's not gonna hurt. All right, so as you can see here, I'm just kind of slowly dissolving the ice. Again, it's a quicker process than a typical brew, but I'm, again, sort of slowly dissolving the ice, but quickly cooling down the temperature of the tea. And the tea should have somewhat of a room temperature heat. You can also use a thermometer, and it should be, what is the temperature, 75 or something like that. I don't use a thermometer. Did I say the right word? I just feel it with my finger and I know what it should feel like, which is, again, room temperature. If you left a glass of water out, at room temperature. So for any of you who are starting out, you will definitely need to purchase from someone the starter tea with or without the pellicle mat, SCOBY, which is the liquid, or you will have to purchase this. If you continue to do the continuous brew, so you're brewing every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you won't have to keep buying this because your fresh brew that fermented for that week or 2 weeks will already have the starter tea in it, so you'll reserve 2. I know it's a lot of information right now, guys, but once you get the hang of it, it's super easy. I promise. You'll be doing it like, this is awesome. Okay, so now I have the tea that we cooled, right? And I'm gonna add it to my vessel of my 2 cups of starter tea, which is the fermented tea from the previous week. Yours you will purchase from the bottle or a friend. Okay. Pour that all in. Everything's in here. It's great, it's happy. You know how I know it's happy? It's when I see the bubbles. Yes, I created bubbles by pouring it in, but I also see other bubbles that just mean it's alive and active and it's already starting to munch on all those sugars and that brewed tea that we had. So that's a good thing. I did not sanitize or clean out this jar and restart because I already had the stuff that was in here, so I know it's okay. But remember, when you're starting out in the very beginning, the very first time you brew, you do need to sanitize everything. You will not put your lid on your vessel. You will use either a washcloth. This is a very old washcloth / towel that I had from years ago, or a regular hand towel. Or you can use multiple paper towel, as long as it's something that cannot allow fruit flies or black flies to get in. I do not recommend cheesecloth. Make sure that whatever fabric material you're using, it is very, very tightly woven, sewn together, because any tiny holes, or even if you have a little hole, fruit flies will find its way in. Black flies will find their way in. Then they will contaminate it and you'll have to throw the whole thing out. And that's just really frustrating and sad. And you can get mold. I like to do a secondary cover just to protect. So I take a paper towel. I have reused this multiple times. The only time I ever change it really is if it gets funky and smell or wet or dirty. And a rubber band. You're gonna wanna put a rubber band around the head of the vessel and just secure it tightly. And you're going to put this into a somewhat not cool, not hot space. I choose to put mine in either my hutch, which I'll show you, or I'll put it in my back linen closet. Either way, no direct sunlight. Let me show you here. So like I'm in my kitchen and this is my cupboard where I keep, I'm very messy, where I keep, you know, some dishes and other things. I have a vessel in here of kefir. Kefir is another probiotic drink. Now, they probably could be together. I do have my starter teas in there together. They recommend that you don't mix different yeasts together because it can kind of damage each other and ruin the process of what's going on. Meaning, like I make sourdough starter, right? I don't put my sourdough starter in the same room that I have my kombucha because they're two different bacterias growing and I don't want one to like offset the other. So, but because kefir and kombucha are similar in acidity and bacterias, it really doesn't hurt. But for this vessel, this one I'm going to put over here. See my hutch, my little coffee station? I'll show you where I put it. So this is my hutch, right? And back here I have another vessel. It's a smaller one, which these ones are nice if you're starting out. This holds, let's see, 6 cups. So it's a little bit smaller if you can tell from this one to this one. You can purchase them on Amazon. But anyways, so this is what I was saying if you needed some starter tea or pellicle that I can give you. I have extra that I leave back there and it just continues to ferment. And I could add more tea to it to multiply the starter tea, but it just have it there as kind of like my emergency backup when I need it so I don't have to go buy any at the store. That was a lot of information, sorry. Okay, and so now I'm gonna take my vessel here, my new brew. I'm gonna put it in the corner here, right? I do have my honey in here as well because I don't like keeping it in the sun. It crystallizes too much. And now I'm just gonna close this up, right? And I'm gonna let that go for a whole week. So I'll go back in every couple days. I'll pop in and look and see if a new, you know, pellicle mat's growing on the top, checking for mold, whatever. And for the most part, I just set it and forget it. It's a great statement until I go to taste it or know that it's at the proper acidity that I like. So remember, 7 to 14 days is preference. Now, I'm going to move on to second fermentation. This is gonna be a longer video and it may be a little overwhelming. Don't worry about the 2F of what we're doing now at this point because you can get through the other stuff, but this will be here for you to go back and reference when you're ready to move on from your first fermentation, which we just did. And now we're gonna move on to the bottles, which is called 2F, second fermentation. And that's where you're gonna flavor your kombucha. You're gonna create carbonation, and that's where you're really gonna drink it. And you're gonna get all those probiotics and you're gonna love it. Okay, so let's do that now. Okay, so I'm gonna show you one other thing before we move on. This is kind of important in my opinion. So there's all kinds of bottles out there that you can use to go into your second fermentation. I personally like to reuse any of the kombucha bottles that I bought in the beginning when I started drinking it before I started brewing it. Or you can use any glass bottles of any drink that you've purchased before, as long as it has a very tight lid with the lacing on it. A lot of people, even my husband, have bought these bottles. Let me shut this off because it's gonna make a loud beeping sound. Which they have a rubber seal and then you push down and it locks them. They're aesthetically pretty. You can see the drink. There's no labels to try to remove. However, this has happened to me twice now. Not with the kombucha because I haven't put the kombucha in, but I've done it with kefir. So I choose not to use these ones because I've exploded it with the kefir. This can have the possibility to rupture on its own, or when you go to open it, because you have to secure the top because it creates carbonation. Carbonation creates bubbles, which is like a gas. It fills up and pop. And we've had a big mess before. And it's also dangerous. So for the kombucha, I choose not to use these. I like these because I can control how slow I'm releasing the air, and I can hold it down and just have a little more control. So, of course, you can buy the big container and reuse that or whatever, but this is just a pro tip, I guess. Use something that has a screw top, just from experience. Okay, we're moving on to the next step. So I heated up some more hot water. I love this thing, it is convenient. And what I do is I take all of my bottles, I take the lids, and I'm gonna put a little water in each one. Okay, sorry, see that? Okay, no big deal, no personal amount, specific amount or anything of that nature, just enough that I'm going to, give it a good swirl inside the bottle, the jar. And then what I'll do is I'll take all these lids, okay, I'll add a little more water. I'm an issue. And I'm gonna put all my tops into the hot water, okay, see? And so that's gonna help everything to sanitize. So I just swirl, 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 and dump. It's really easy. Some people go to the lengths of getting hot water and vinegar mixed together, or they'll buy, you know, like a sanitizing solution. My husband has it for when he brews his wine, but I choose not to use it because this hasn't created a problem for me. And so I do what works, and I try not to overthink it, but also keeping in mind that there are necessary steps to be taken. So that's it, I just do that. I make sure these are all swirled around really well. That water's hot. Whoop, that one I dropped. So that one I'm gonna rinse again. Folks, now we are moving on to 2F, which is second fermentation. That's when after your kombucha has sat for a week to 14 days, 7 to 14 days, you're going to flavor it, and now you're going to create your carbonation. So this batch I showed you last week or 2 weeks ago, that was sitting to show you the pellicle mat, and then the starter tea, which is the SCOBY. SCOBY stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria, symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. Thank you. Had to. Which is really good for your gut. That's why we're making the kombucha. So this sat for well more than 7 days. I usually do 7 days because the longer it sits, the more acidic it becomes, more vinegar flavor, and not everybody likes that. 5 days in, give it a taste. Also, maybe by day 2 or 3, check and look and see if there's a thin, clear mat starting to develop on top. That's good, you want that, as long as there's no mold. Mold will be blue or black or red or pink and fuzzy. That's dangerous and it's bad, and if you get that, you have to dump the whole thing out and start over. With that being said, so I have my jars set aside, and now I have my brew that's ready. And like I said, you could taste it after 5 days to see if you want to let it go a little longer, or if you're ready to pull back and start flavoring it. If you taste it with a spoon, make sure your spoon is sanitized. I typically always use metal. I prefer to avoid wood. And do not dip it back in once you've tasted or put anything on your mouth. So you're gonna open it up, and I'm gonna show you. See inside there? So what I've done here is I pulled out a little bit of juice from the fridge. It should, again, you wanna try to keep it at room temperature if possible. If something's too cold or too hot, it's gonna kill the SCOBY inside of the fermented tea, and then you don't want that because then you just have a drink. You don't have the fermentation, the probiotics that you need. So I pulled this out a while ago this morning. It's a 1/4 cup of grapefruit juice, a 1/4 cup of fresh squeezed orange juice, and then I pulled out 4 blackberries and about 5 raspberries. I prefer using juice. It doesn't seem to change the flavor it gives flavor to the tea, whereas the fresh fruit, because it breaks down, sometimes can change the flavor, but this is all I've got. And also the fresh fruit is good if you drink it quick enough, and then you can eat it at the end, or you can give it to your chickens or whatever. And then I also grabbed some lemon, fresh lemon, and some ginger. you into a different position so you can see what I'm doing here. So I have my jars that are sanitized, my lids, and my tea that I took from my original brew that I showed you a couple weeks ago, and put it into a bowl, and I reserved 2 cups and added it to my new brew that we just did together into my vessel, because you need the 2 cups of starter tea, or you may purchase your 2 cups of starter tea. And we're gonna let that go, set it and forget it. But now I have this tea, right? And this is the fermented tea. And you can smell it. Kind of smells like a dirty dishcloth. Or I always think of like my oldest son's gym shoes, or, you know, it's very vinegary, but that's good. That means that's what you want. That's a good thing. So I'm gonna take my 2 cup measuring cup and I'm gonna pour some in here carefully without trying to waste any of it. Okay, fill that right up. Set that aside. And now we're gonna start filling our jars. So what I'll do here is I'll line up my jars, my bottles, I should say. And using you can use silicone or metal, whatever you have. What are these called? I can't think. You know, one of these things. Siphon? Funnel? Funnel? I think that's what it's called, funnel. You know, like when you put oil in your car. And I'm gonna start dividing the tea up amongst all of the jars without spilling it everywhere, which I am. So I'll go about, if you can see in this jar here, possibly, I went to, see in there? Right before this paper line. I'm gonna do that with all of the jars until the tea is evenly distributed throughout each one. Then we're gonna top it off with our juice or our fresh fruit. You can use herbs and spices. You really can add anything, to be quite honest. You just wanna make sure there's sugar. Alrighty, y'all, beautiful people. Okay, so I went through and I checked each jar, and they're typically, as you can see, pretty close in even length or even fill of the kombucha. So now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna use my funnel again. I'm just gonna pick a jar and I'm gonna add my juice. Now, one of the rules or rule of thumb that I didn't in the first few brews pay attention to is that you need to have a proper amount of headspace in your jar. That will help create the carbonation, or else it won't carbonate and then you'll just have flat tea. And so you don't want to fill it all the way to the top, but you don't want this much space. So I added some grapefruit juice here. In this one, it was about a 1/4 cup. I feel like I could maybe put a little bit more. So I'll have to set this one aside. I'll put the top on and I'll pull some out of my fridge and let it, you know, get to room temperature and add a little more to that. Okay, so I'm gonna continue on, and I'm starting to think, you know what? I might have one too many jars. So what I can do is fill up all but one with the fruit, and then take the last bottle and top off the rest to the proper headspace I need and see if that works out. We'll do this together and see. So now here I have my orange juice, and I'm just stirring it because it is fresh squeezed, everything kind of separated, and I don't know, I'm just weird. I feel like it'll make a difference maybe, I don't know. I'm gonna add my orange juice. 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup. I can add more of that. See, that's definitely not enough. So I'm gonna put that one aside, and we'll see if we need to add more tea and remove one of our bottles. I may have pulled too many bottles. I kind of was just doing it quickly, not really paying attention to what I was doing. Okay, so this one I'm gonna add some blackberries and some raspberries. Should I do all blackberry and raspberry? Okay, we have a couple more here. This one's a little smaller. I do like these GT brand bottles. I just like the size of them. Okay, so I have the lemon here, so let's squeeze some. Here we go. We'll use this. We're gonna squeeze some fresh lemon in there. You can put the what am I saying? You can put the skin in, but because the skin's kind of bitter, I'm thinking I'm gonna leave it out, and I'm just gonna squeeze a little more. And to this fresh squeezed lemon here, I'm gonna add the ginger, but the ginger I'm not gonna really try to squeeze or grate or whatever. Well, maybe I could grate it actually, or I could just put it in whole like that. But you know what I'll do? I'll just cut, well, take a little bit of that skin out. I'll just cut little chunks like that, see? And I'll just drop it in. And the ginger and the lemon, I think ginger's just delicious and everything. Okay, last bottle I have, yeah, that looks full. Sorry. I have a couple strawberries here that the kids didn't eat from this morning. So I'm just taking off the stem, and what I'm gonna do is cut them into fourths. I don't want them to be too big because I want to be able to get them out of the jar next time so that I can sanitize and clean my jar out. So I'm just making sure that I'm cutting these pieces appropriately so that they'll be able to slide out of the jar. Okay, so that one, I think this is enough fruit. So what I'm gonna do, instead of topping off my last bottle, I'm gonna just top off each jar. So I have 5 here with the remaining bottle of kombucha. That way I can get to the right headspace. Alrighty, so I guess we'll start with this one. This one was the orange. Now I'm going to fill it just finger length. That's the terminology, I guess, of headspace. Meaning if I can go like this, put my finger to the side, and from the tip of the finger to the first knuckle, there's enough airspace for the carbonation. That's how full you want it to be. So that's how I go, based off of how much liquid should be in here. So we'll go on to the next one. Okay. I know the darker bottles are a little bit harder for you all to see, but I can see them up close here. Almost finished. There we go. This one I really don't think I'm gonna add that much because it's a wider mouth. I want it to have the appropriate space. So let's see how the rest of them look. They look good. Okay, so I have all my bottles. They're all cleaned up. I'm going to put them off to the side here. They're going to be next to my kefir, all my little probiotic drinks that I make. And they're kind of in a corner. They're not in direct sunlight, but they are on the counter. I kind of put them next to my air fryer. It gives off a little heat, which helps with the fermentation and carbonation process. All my little drinks that I have here. And those are gonna sit for about 3 days. I prefer my kombucha to have a little more carbonation to it. And so what I'll do is every day from now until like in the morning, I'll go and open a bottle slowly and see where the fizz is at, like when you open it, and I'll show you. You can come along with me while I do that. Same here with my kefir too. But within about 3 days, it will, you'll barely be able to open it quickly. It'll just be wanting to bubble and ooze right out of the top. And that's like the best way to know that it's gonna taste really good and have really good, bubbly, flavorful drink. And so at that point, I would say by day 2 or 3, once you've reached the carbonation level that you choose, you're going to move your drink into the refrigerator. That will slow down the fermentation process, and it will also chill the drink. Because if you leave it out too long in the room temperature, you don't want it to explode, because it will continue to ferment and create more air, more bubbles, more carbonation, and it just tastes better cold anyway. But the first 2 to 3 days are the best. That's where you're gonna get the proper, in my opinion, level of that bubbly, seltzery kombucha drink. So yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was a little long, but it is a process. Don't get overwhelmed. Reach out if you have questions. I understand it's a lot of information, but once you get the hang of it, it's so worth it. It's an amazing drink, and I think you're gonna be really excited and happy. So take care, bye. Happy brewing, enjoy.